AWS. Ooh, recording started. So we've got some really great speakers on the call today. We've got Robin Hollins, who's formerly at NHS Digital Cloud, going to talk about some of their experiences of moving to the cloud. Then we're going to touch on VMC in the cloud, which is obviously a great way of moving to the cloud without quite as much disruption of going completely AWS native. Then one of the biggest questions we always get is, what do I do with my Microsoft licenses and workloads on AWS? So we're going to be talking to Scott to give us some insight into that. And then I'll be finishing up with how we actually do the assessments, what you get out of it, and what's needed on your side to get it done. And then at the end, a few minutes of Q&A. So now I'm going to hand over to Robin.
Cool, thank you. It's the moment we're waiting for. Does the screen share work?
Yeah, working.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So yeah, as you may gather, my name's Rob Hollins. Before joining AWS as a technical account manager, I used to work as the principal cloud engineer for NHS Digital, and part of my role was heavily involved with our cloud migration, and that's kind of the narrative and the story I'm going to tell today. So just to set the scene on the challenges that we were faced with, NHS Digital around about late 2018, I think, from sort of memory, we had a strategic move to cloud first. It's a term commonly used across a lot of organizations in recent years, but essentially the kind of strategic move on high was that essentially all transformational projects, whether it be new or reiterations, migrations, should be done to a cloud first alignment. Now, what that meant for me as an infrastructure engineer when this first started was my concern was that we had two major data centers. They were scheduled to close in late 2020. As it would turn out, due to COVID, it would actually get pushed back to mid 2021. But at the time, we didn't understand that. And obviously, that challenge brings quite a lot of fear factor. How am I going to do this? So looking at what the workloads and what the estate was at the time was 90% of our data center workloads were VMware based. There's around about 5,000 virtual machines spread across 6 vCenters, don't ask, which made things quite complex due to various parts of NHS Digital being brought together into one company previously. We had loads of different iterations of VSXi, VRA, vRealize Orchestrator, and NSX, and around 150 hosts. So it's quite a complex environment in VMware terms. We also, alongside that, had about 18 SAN and NAS arrays that were essentially being sweated. They were coming towards the end of the support life, towards the end of 2020 and into 2021. And as a background, my team and the extended team was very experienced, really skilled in let's call it traditional infrastructure in terms of data centers, but they've got some limited cloud exposure to date, but they were in the process of upskilling and training. So when we looked and started to think about what we could do with essentially this majority VMware workload, we drew up a prioritization. Now, the first was that wherever possible, we would try and modernize with cloud native services. So rather than attempting to just lift and shift, we'd look at modernizing into better ways or smarter ways of doing things where that was possible. Wherever we went, we needed it to be resilient and we needed it to be highly available. We also needed to try and reduce the technical team demand. Now, what I mean on that is we were spending a lot of time firefighting, essentially, especially on such a disparate VMware estate. There was all kinds of patch revisions, versions. Maintenance was just a major headache across the estate on a month-by-month basis. And also, we wanted to at least maintain our security stance in terms of the way we'd done micro-segmentation in some areas, or improve it wherever possible. It also needed to be scalable and elastic. We didn't want to get stuck in the situation that we'd had in our data centers, where essentially we'd always come up to hard stop walls, especially on storage. And we'd had situations where the data center had failed and trying to get various parts of the data center failed and trying to get storage arrays and replacement hardware, and that was a particular challenge. And finally, and probably the most important, we wanted to do the migration with absolute minimum downtime, near zero if at all possible. Essentially, with a lot of our workloads, they were with application and service teams who didn't have a great understanding of their application. So we wanted to provide a fluid methodology to get them out of a data center and into a modern public cloud setting without them realistically even knowing about it wherever possible. So what did that look like in the end? As part of our reasoning and as part of our migration, we actually ended up decommissioning around 600 servers as part of the migration. Now, that came about because of the next element. We used VMware on AWS. Now, because of some of the inbuilt resiliency we used a stretch cluster, we were able to select some virtual machines that were cold standbys or idle standbys, however you want to think of them, realize that they weren't updated, but actually were providing a fairly native failover mechanism, and they would no longer be required. And that gave us an opportunity to cut the estate size down. We then migrated around about 3,500 virtual machines to VMware on AWS using HCX with near zero downtime. Essentially, when you do that with what's known as a vMotion migration, it essentially drops perhaps 3 or 4 pings at the most, and the workload migrates from your on-premises to a stretch VLAN cluster in the cloud, and the end result is, more often than not, the end users don't even know about it. We also took the opportunity to remove SQL database clusters, traditional Microsoft server-based clusters, and move them to AWS ODS. Now, that wasn't a great number of virtual machines, but I'm sure a lot of people will respect that quite often SQL clusters are heavyweight virtual machines, and they can be quite costly in terms of the resource consumption. So we took the opportunity to move those into a native cloud service, and that was really successful. We also took some other elements and modernized them, and we used ECS, elements of EC2, where it was positioned better to have them in native AWS, or Lambda, just to take some applications and some app services and streamlined in the migration process, move them into those environments. And finally, we took what was a great opportunity in the end to try and get rid of our storage arrays. So we started to use elastic storage solutions in AWS, such the most famous obviously being S3, which generally dealt with our backups, but we also moved things like our Windows SMB based shares into FSX and some other storage shares for Linux workloads into EFS. And then eventually we were able to decommission all our physical storage arrays in the data centers. So finally, the kind of end result of this was that we ended up as the largest public sector VMware and AWS deployment in the EU. At the time, I don't know if that's still the case, we had 2 software-defined data centers, 54 hosts mixed between the i3 and the i3EN types. For those of you who don't know, the i3EN types have larger essentially a higher computed, larger storage provision to them. We also were able to reduce the storage costs overall by around about 30 to 40%. Now, that was a combination of not refreshing arrays, e.g. buying new ones, but also not paying support charges, which we found were very costly on a year-on-year basis, particularly on sweated arrays, where they were still useful, but you were extending their life cycle. We also brought the compute hosting down by around about 25% as the total cost of ownership. There's a number of elements that go into that, and it becomes quite complex for organizations to calculate. But alongside that, we also found by simplifying the workload support, we recovered around about 1.5 full-time equivalent engineers' time on a yearly basis around patching, maintenance, general firefighting. And finally, we were able to kind of increase our security baseline, for want of a better term, by applying micro-segmentation firewall across the board on all our virtual machines. We increased resilience by using stretch clustering, VMC. Performance was improved because the VMware hosts are backed by NVMe disks, which are extremely fast. And we found that once we migrated certain workloads, we had users saying, wow, that's amazing. The database response is out of this world now, for example. And we're also able to integrate it with all the native services like application load balancing, elastic load balancing, to kind of, again, build out that resiliency and availability. And then finally, one of the last streams we did, which wasn't an anticipated thing when we started, was we were able to really improve the kind of cross-department and cross-silo sharing of resource by using AWS transit gateways. And we came up with a really useful model for there to provision new services and new applications, but utilize resource that they previously would have been quite a challenge for them to get access to. And that's about it. I know it's rattled through, but yeah, it was a pretty successful story and one that we were very pleased with internally at the time.
Thanks, Robin. It's perfect. I'm going to hand over to David now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. And thank you, Robin. That's a really nice segue into what we're going to be discussing. So if you bear with me one moment, I shall just share my screen. Excellent. Okay, there we go. Fantastic. So hopefully what will have happened is Robin's done a fantastic segue for me to go with into my presentation here. So I'm David Owen, Specialist Solutions Architect focused on VMC on AWS within AWS. And hopefully I'll put a little bit more context around that fantastic kind of real world use case that Robin's just spoke to there. So from a migration perspective, at AWS, we have the 7 Rs. It's kind of what we refer to a lot. So that ranges from retaining or retiring things all the way through to re-platforming. But what we're really going to be focused on today is relocate. So that's where VMC and AWS really comes into its own. So, you know, there was some fantastic use cases there that kind of Robin mentioned around not being able to suffer much downtime or any downtime for some of the application sets. Those are the kind of use cases where VMC on AWS really shines. But we'll touch a little bit on some of the other pieces as well, because that ties in nicely with the whole proposal. So just a little bit of information on what VMware Cloud and AWS brings from a benefits perspective. Because it is a VMware managed service. So effectively, VMware manages the vSphere, vSAN, and NSX elements. So the traditional pieces that you would see within a VMware environment, just from a VMware side. So there's the storage, the network, and the compute. It means that you don't have to do that. So patching is managed by VMware. Solution design on the underlying pieces managed by VMware. So that's something that is augmented away from the customer, which is often a pain. Operational consistency, that's a big one. So not every customer is AWS native certified or competent yet. So having a VMware strong background, which a lot of customers have, it means we can maintain that while also taking them to the cloud at the same time. Workload portability, like we mentioned before, is really important when there needs to remain some consistency. We're not trying to rebuild or re-platform things. And that becomes a very, very well-fitted use case for VMC. Native integration is one of the big advantages of going down the VMC road. That is the integration into the AWS native services. Robin mentioned some of those kind of benefits in what they were doing in NHS Digital, and there's a plethora of AWS services that you have access to once you've done that migration, and you can really see that migration path, not just from a lift and shift perspective, but as you start to re-platform and rebuild and redesign. And that lets you do things like application modernization. So whether or not you use some of the AWS native services just to integrate with your existing application set, or you actually start to decouple your existing application set in itself and rebuild onto AWS to be able to modernize the applications themselves. So what does VMC look like? So everyone will be familiar with their own on-premises environment, traditional data center with a vCenter in front. In Robin's case, 6 vCenters, so quite complex. But a traditional data center, where AWS comes in all this is that we provide the global infrastructure that underpins it. And then we've jointly engineered along with VMware, the VMware Cloud and AWS platform. So the entire thing is a jointly engineered system. What you would experience, though, is very similar to what you'd see on premises. So you'd still get a vCenter, you'd still have access to the all underlying things that you would expect to see, but they are managed by VMware in that sense. There would be a link, and depending on what that is, I'll touch a little bit on networking shortly, but we would have a link back to the on-premises environment, and you would be able to manage that the same way you manage your existing environment. So that consistency of operation is there as well. And also the connectivity back into the AWS world. And that's actually done on the AWS backbone effectively. So it's not going out back at the internet back in, and it's effectively depending on the scenario, it's a free access back into that network environment at very fast bandwidths as well. The shared responsibility model, if you're familiar with AWS, this is something that we push a lot. But in this scenario, it's slightly different because it's a jointly engineered service managed by VMware. So AWS is responsible for all of the global infrastructure, edge locations, all of that kind of thing. VMware is specifically responsible for the vSphere part, so compute, storage, and network, and so just the SDDC, the software-defined data center. And then they still expect everything that you would expect from your VMware environment today, you be responsible for above that. So all of your, what you put in your virtual machines effectively. So migration specifically, we have quite a few options. So Robin mentioned around the live migration and things. You don't have to do that. So you could just do cold migrations. The HCX, the hybrid cloud extension tool, is a fantastic tool for being able to do these kind of scheduled bulk migrations. But it also enables you to do something called a layer 2 stretched network. It's actually slightly different to your vMotion network, but it means that you can vMotion from your on-premises environment to the VMC on AWS environment without incurring downtime. And what does that look like in practice? Well, slightly complex diagram for you. So this is available online. I'm sure we can share the slides afterwards. But effectively, there is an appliance that we install on premises, and that links back to the VMC environment where we can do this stretch layer 2 environment if necessary. It's included within VMC, so there's no additional cost for the HCX component. And it does some quite cool things around network optimization, deduplication, and compression as well on the line. So you get very fast speeds. You can do it over Direct Connect, which is the AWS dedicated link, which you can go up to 10 gigabits a second. Or you can do it over the internet as long as we've got 100 megabits per second as well. From a Direct Connect, I just mentioned Direct Connect there. This is a quick example of what that would look like. So your on-premises router or default gateway would connect to the VMware Direct Connect service. That's a standard Direct Connect service, not specific to VMC, but the standard service. And then we can integrate into that. So the VMware Cloud on AWS service integrates with the Direct Connect service, and you can create a private virtual interface, and all of the traffic will go along there, along that line. So you install the HCX appliance on VMC, install it on premises, and then you have your stretched cluster and your stretched layer 2 network, and you're able to move your workloads across. The cool thing about that is you're able to maintain the same IP address that you have on-prem that you have now, and the network is effectively stretched so you can communicate between the two as well. So nice little animation to show that. Service integrations. This is really where the cool benefits of migration from a perspective of not having any downtime, that they are very beneficial. However, where it really comes into its own is a little bit further down the line. So how do we, once we've got those workloads over, how do we really make the most of the services that we got access to? So things like replacing, I mean, Robin mentioned around replacing storage that they had on premises with some of the storage within the AWS portfolio, S3, those kind of services. That's actually a really good use case, but also you can do things like replacing your load balancing services as well. So you can integrate from that perspective. You can then optimize. So you can, and I've got a quick example of that in a moment around how you can utilize the data that you've brought with you from the into VMC with the rest of the AWS stack of data analytics and those types of things. I'll show you a quick example of that shortly as well. And then you can also use access other environments, things like containers, Lambda, those types of things, and be able to connect back into the VMC environment as well. So you can integrate your applications or completely rewrite them into AWS as well. So it's having that option. It's much easier once you've got into close to the AWS native environment in VMC than it would be if you were still on premises. So how does that connectivity actually work? So I mentioned around the backbone piece, it's very fast. So in the VMC environment, you have what's called an NSX edge that is connected back into the AWS native environment via a host, and that host is the dedicated link. What happens is if that host goes down, that is a common question. Well, actually, there's a spare NSX edge router effectively live all the time, and the traffic just diverts to the next one. So you might lose a packet, but effectively it's live constantly, and the traffic just reroutes there. So effectively, you see no loss of service. So from a host perspective, it's very, very resilient. So a quick example I mentioned around the data analytics piece. So we've got within the VMware Cloud and AWS environment, a very simple environment, a Postgres SQL instance, and a data warehouse effectively sat in AWS, a VMware on AWS. How can we utilize that? Well, we can use things like AWS Glue to start crawling the data and putting into a data cataloging that data. And then we can create jobs that put that data into S3 for other things to access. So you can, again, crawl that data back into a data catalog. And then we can do cool things like using Athena and also from a different source of data into the same data catalog. So you've got a single view of all of that. And then you can start doing things like analyzing it with AWS QuickSight. So quickly, you can see in a very, very short period of time, because that data is now accessible and very, very close because of this ENI connection that's available. All of that data is very, very easy to get at, easy to analyze, and you can start utilize all of those additional AWS native services. So that's all I had. So hopefully that's been useful. If you have any questions, by all means, put them in the chat or we can send them through afterwards. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. So now we're going to move over to Microsoft Workflows on AWS with Scott. If you can share your screen now. Perfect. I can see him.
Would it best if I unmute myself as well?
Yeah, that's good.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I realise the time, so I'm going to try and rattle through this as quickly as possible. But if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll come to them at the very end. So my name's Scott Goodall. I look after Microsoft Workloads on AWS, covering the UK public sector market. So just to sort of lay some scenes here, as you can obviously tell, cloud transformation is accelerating. Over 91% of enterprises expect cloud usage to exceed prior plans due to the wonderful COVID-19. Linked to this, enterprises expect over 50% of enterprise workloads and data are expected to be in the public cloud within 12 months. Now, when it comes to enterprise strategic workloads, we've covered and seen quite a bit there from VMware. The vast majority of what customers want to do day to day is still based on vendor solutions such as Microsoft, SAP, Oracle and mainframe. These are general figures. However, in regards to Microsoft, I'd argue that this figure is much higher in the public sector in the UK. I'd argue that over 95% of what customers use is certainly Windows Server and or SQL Server to run their organizations. So it's clear that you need a public cloud vendor that can support any and all of these solutions. Customers often find some immediate tangible benefits from moving to AWS. When it comes to Microsoft workloads, AWS actually hosts 2 times more instances than any other cloud provider. And there's obviously some a stat here around VMware. VMware customers on average see a 43% reduction in IT infrastructure costs from running VMware on AWS. And there's some facts here around some of the other strategic workloads that I've mentioned. Specifically when it comes to Microsoft workloads, these are the common themes that the customers in the public sector tend to talk to me about on a day-to-day basis. Some customers are still often surprised when we want to talk to them about moving their Microsoft workloads to AWS, and usually ask questions such as, can I move my existing licenses? Does AWS support my on-premise workloads? And does AWS help me lower my Microsoft workloads total cost of ownership? The good news is the answer to all of these is a resounding yes. And when customers look to AWS for their Microsoft workloads, these are the most common use cases that we've seen. So migrating Windows Server VMs to AWS to either extend their existing on-premise data centers or fully move from on-premise using EC2 instances with dedicated hosts. And we also have tools that can help with these migrations, such as the main thing that we would like to talk to you around is optimized licensing assessment. This is a free service provided by AWS and Bytes and allows us to look at your infrastructure and provide you a full cost of this is how much it will cost you to run your service in AWS. On average with OLA, which is short for optimized licensing assessment, we see a 36% saving in Windows Server licensing costs of customers who move to AWS. Also, customers wanting to optimize their SQL Server estate through either migrating their existing workloads to Amazon or through moving to AWS managed SQL offerings. Again, the optimized licensing assessment picks up SQL. On an average, it produces and provides a 40% reduction in SQL licensing costs for customers. The third is helping customers modernize off their apologies, let me just get back to that. Modernizing their existing .NET applications through either refactoring them to different development languages or simply re-platforming them to a more stable environment on AWS. And we can also help optimize your .NET usage on AWS. AWS can also help you with innovating and driving business agility by helping you modernize off Microsoft solutions altogether. We saw a little bit of that conversation in the VMware piece as well. So what we can do is we can help you modernize off SQL and Windows Server potentially via the use of things like immersion days and proof of concepts. Just as a pure example, if you were to move your existing solution from SQL to Aurora, which is an Amazon database server, customers on average see a 90% decrease in SQL licensing costs by removing SQL and using Aurora as their database solution. When customers have decided to move their workloads in AWS, we've actually asked them what their reasons for doing so was. And these were the 5 biggest factors. Breadth and depth. So customers not only want to run Microsoft workloads, but others. And AWS is uniquely placed to run multiple different services. We actually offer over 200 services to customers. But also, as I mentioned, if customers want to modernize off Microsoft workloads, for example, using Aurora over SQL or Linux over Windows, not only can they make substantial cost savings, but AWS is the best place for these open source cloud native solutions. Reliability and security. Due to our unique architecture, we are consistently the most reliable and secure public cloud, and have some stats to show you on that in a future slide. We also offer better performance. So we've independently been verified that we offer 2 times better SQL performance than any other cloud platform. And we can also help you lower your total cost of ownership, where Amazon is unique, unlike any other vendor certainly I've ever worked for. We actively try and reduce prices for customers. In fact, ever since 2006, we've had 107 price reductions. And of course, innovation and experience. So here's an interesting stat for you. We've been running Microsoft workloads for 14 years on AWS, which is ironically 4 more years than any other cloud platform out there. Mention reliability and infrastructure. As noted, there are some of the stats. I get that these are from, and just to make you aware, these are from 2019 to 2020. We do have some further stats from last year, but I'm just going through verification before I can share those with you. But I'd note that this is just for Azure. If you're a customer with Microsoft for Office 365 or Dynamics 365, you'll have seen more downtime in service disruptions from those services as well. And the 2021 stats are even bigger. We're just waiting for them to be approved before sharing that. Sorry, that was the slide I was meant to share there when I'm talking about some of that. But you can see here from downtime and number of service disruptions compared to Azure. As AWS was the first public cloud vendor by 4 years to allow customers to run Microsoft workloads, all the way back and running Windows Server 2003 in 2008. Not only has this led us to have a ton of experience in helping customers migrate and deploy workloads on AWS, but it also means we've created a wealth of resources and programs to help out customers, such as the optimized licensing assessment, the migration readiness assessment, and the migration acceleration program, which help our customers seamlessly move their workloads to the cloud. I'd also note that our innovation in all of these solutions, not only do we support the most recent versions of Windows and SQL, but we can also use the older versions on AWS. So back to 2008, etc. If Windows Server and SQL Server, you want to run those types of solutions. And AWS supports everything you need to build and run your Windows applications, including Active Directory, .NET, System Center, SQL, Visual Studio, and we also have Windows Desktop as a service. We've also built some features exclusive to AWS, such as the only fully managed native Windows file system available in the cloud with Amazon FSx for Windows File Server. And we're also the only provider to provide production support for Kubernetes on Windows. I'd also note that during the last 14 years, Microsoft has changed their licensing model repeatedly, and they've raised prices across their product lines, including Windows and SQL Server. To be fair, not all of these changes are detrimental or more restrictive, but either way, licensing changes cause additional work for your teams. Each change requires at least a license audit or review to ensure continued compliance, and many of the changes require substantial rework. The end of support events also bring upgrades, some of which are not as backward as compatible as we'd like. What this amounts to over time is increased risk and cost for remaining with licensed products. As I mentioned, modernization is a way to move some of these solutions to a more cloud native and open source scenario. I'm going to rush through some of these slides because I'm just looking at the time here. Effectively, just to quickly run through the next two, we did an independent researcher in DBBest and ZK Research dove into SQL performance on AWS compared to Azure with a completely blank canvas, and came up with these stats here that show that AWS is quicker and better performing on AWS compared to Azure, and likewise with here from a transactions per minute perspective. SQL Server, if SQL Server is something you have in your own environment, as I mentioned before, it's when I speak to customers, they often say it's their highest cost in IT spend. The optimized licensing assessment can really help you here and understand and optimize your estate. As noted before, on average, when we run an OLA on SQL estate, we see customers saving on average around 40% in licensing costs by moving those into AWS. So the OLA is highly, highly recommended for customers who are running SQL estates. And as I mentioned, as a customer, there's no cost to you and you'll get all the data and insights back. I'm just going to quickly skip on, but note that these are the 6 other reasons that some customers choose to move to SQL on AWS, to the most important slide of all, and everyone's favorite topic, Microsoft licensing. At AWS, we do have a couple of different options dependent on your licensing status with Microsoft. The first one is dependent on some caveats, which we can discuss at a later date, bringing your existing licenses over to AWS for Windows Server on dedicated hosts and SQL Server on shared tenancy. We can also factor these into the OLA assessment we perform to give you a proper and true cost of running your environment on AWS. The second option is to let AWS take care of all of your licensing requirements by using license included. So this allows AWS to remove the requirement for you to have an enterprise agreement with Microsoft for SQL and Windows Server, and we'll take care of all of the licensing that comes with that with Microsoft. You also get access to the most latest and greatest versions of SQL and Windows Server on AWS. And we do have something called AWS License Manager, which will continuously optimize your spend and allows you to manage and discover your software licensing usage. Again, I've got a few slides, but I'm just going to quickly nip through some of these, just to say that this is the typical journey that we see on a Windows workloads customer, from on-premise to migrating their estate to AWS, either using an OLA beforehand or after to optimize their estate. And then there may be some workloads that they want to modernize. Just as an example, here are some of the options AWS can provide from a modernization perspective for customers. So not only is there multiple options and significant cost reductions, but modernizing to cloud native options also increases innovation capacity and can help you on every step of the journey. Last slide, and then I'm going to hand over. Just to note that we've been recognized as a leader for the 11th consecutive year in the Magic Quadrant for Cloud Infrastructure and Platform Services, and I know how highly everyone rates Gartner. I'll hand over now. If there's any questions, I'll try and get them to the chat or the Q&A at the end of this time, but thanks for your time.
Thanks, Scott. Perfect. So over to me. So conscious of time, probably should have given us a little bit more time than this, but my part won't take too long. It's very much how you go about the next steps, really, how you can kind of progress. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Shout if you can't. Cool. So my name is Simon Walker. I'm Director of Public Cloud Services. Just a quick rundown on Bytes. If you don't know us, we're an advanced consultancy partner. We've done a ton of these types of migrations now. We actually got awarded 2 years on the trot for Windows migrations, which is exactly what we're talking about today. And we specialize in essentially assessing the customer's environments, building out the migration plan, getting into Amazon, and then providing cost optimization, security governance, and managed services off the back of it. We've kind of talked about this journey many times, and you'll hear it many times more. But essentially, what we like to try and convey is this isn't just a one-stop shop. You know, if we talk about this OLA engagement, which essentially is the first phase of an assessment of what it might look like to move into the cloud, then we have all these other phases, discovery, where we go into even more detail. And each of these phases are typically funded as part of a migration acceleration program from AWS. So we do a lot of the heavy lifting for you to build these plans out and these migration plans. And even after we've done discovery, we move into what we call the mobilize phase, which is just testing workloads, doing pilots, making sure the runbooks are all agreed, making sure the team on your side are confident in terms of what we're doing. And then we finally move into a migrate, broken down into several wave plans. We've mentioned it and touched on it, but modernization is a huge part of reducing costs when moving to the cloud. If you just do a lift and shift, it's unlikely you're going to save a great deal of money. We look at different workloads which can be modernized, moving to more serverless-based architecture, on-demand architecture where possible, and that really pushes the cost down. And then we have a constant cost optimization focus. Amazon's always reducing costs. We're always focused on trying to reduce costs for our customers. And then we have our 24/7 managed services to support customers who need it, essentially. So those gaps that may appear as a result of moving the cloud, we want to plug those and make sure the team has plenty of time to get skilled up. So I have got a short video, so I'm hoping this will work. This is just a quick overview of what the assess phase is.
You know it's something your organisation needs, but perhaps you're not sure what it involves, how to get there, or even where to start. We're public sector specialists and an advanced consulting partner for AWS, the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform, and have delivered more focused public sector engagements than any other partner in Europe. With the assess phase, we can help you see where you are now, where you need to be, and what we have to do to get there. That way, you'll get the most benefit and savings from the cloud. We know you need a robust approach to procurement, so we don't just consider a single cloud in isolation. Our sector specialists provide your organisation with a broad overview of cloud provider costs so you can make informed decisions. We can also help secure funding for you, making the cost benefits even greater. We do this via a detailed migration assessment designed to meet the needs of your organisation. We also help you get to grips, not just with procurement in the cloud, but with programs like the One Government Value Agreement. The assess phase is just one element of a rewarding and clear TCO engagement that we can deliver as your public sector AWS Advanced Cloud Consulting Partner. From start to finish, our public sector experts are ready to answer any question you have, from budgeting and licensing to backups and how OGVA procurement works in AWS. Claim your funded assessment to start your migration journey. Get the most out of the cloud. Check out the next video in our series.
So we'll share the links for the other videos so you can see each of the different phases. I'm not going to touch too much on this because this has been covered, but when we actually do the assessment, we typically focus around the optimized lift and shift as opposed to looking at refactoring at this stage. For all the reasons we've kind of covered off today, we want to keep things as simple and quick as possible, and then we move into the more modernized refactoring phase. This is just an example of the report that we carry out when we do the assessment. So this particular public sector customer, you can see, had 407 servers in scope. We analyze it, we look at the performance of it, and we look to right size it. So we don't take like for like, we do look at what it's actually doing over a period of time, and then we make the assessments on the sizing based on that. Then we break down all the different costs, the different procurement options, the different licensing options that might be available. We build in backup costs, network costs, so you've got this full 360 view of what it's going to look like. We even estimate what it's going to look like in year one, because you're never going to switch everything over immediately and for everything to be live. It's not like buying hardware. It will be a scaled up approach. So we look at the project management aspects of it and the migration timescales, and then we build out what that first month, again, kind of helping with that. We also build in growth of storage and compute, again, just to try and make it as realistic as possible before making kind of those final decisions. We also look at funding programs, whether it be the Windows Rapid Migration Program or a Migration Acceleration Program. You don't need to understand all these terminologies. We do that for you. We work out what the best program is that fits you to support you. But essentially the programs are excellent from AWS to get you there faster, with a huge amount of funding to support on the kind of TCO benefits of actually moving to the cloud in the first place. This just gives you, again, a quick overview snapshot. Once you've followed the OLA, essentially the first element of the assess phase, you can go into a lot more detail following that. Then we move into mobilize, migrate, and then modernize. So in terms of next steps, call to actions, hopefully those of you on the call will confirm that you want to move ahead and do an OLA assessment. We can obviously get that progressed and processed very quickly. Very little needed on your part, just a nod to your account manager or AWS account manager on our side. Then we'll go and apply for the approval funding for that piece of work. Then we just deploy a tool set called Cloudomize across your estate. On your side, probably you're talking about half an hour to an hour's worth of work, but our engineers will talk you through it every step of the way. Then we sit back and wait for those results to start coming through. It takes typically around 2 or 3 weeks. And then we present back the results in that kind of presentation format that you saw previously. So it's very clear. And then you're on to the next stage, whether you want to move on to the next phase, which is more of a deeper dive discovery assessment element, which most customers do following that initial assess phase. So that's it from me. So George, I don't know if there's any questions that have come through.
Yeah, no, I can't see any on the chat. If you do have any questions at all, just pop them in the chat box and we'll answer them for you. I'm just going to put a poll up on your screens as well, so please do complete this if you get the chance. We always appreciate your feedback. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed today. Please get in touch with an account manager if you want any further information at all. And have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.